Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into a true crime case today. One that, well, it really makes you think about those cases that seem straightforward at first. But as we dig deeper, things get complicated. It all starts on New Year's Eve, 1991. A young man, William Smith, is murdered. And though witnesses quickly identify the shooter, well, getting justice for William is anything but simple.
It's a case that really highlights how, even when you think you have a clear picture of what happened, the truth can be much more elusive. And the fact that it happened in the middle of New Year's Eve celebrations, well, that just adds another layer of complexity.
New York City in 91, it was kind of notorious back then. Crime rates were high, especially in Brooklyn. So picture this. New Year's Eve, the city is buzzing, everyone's out celebrating, Times Square is packed for the ball drop.
It's a fascinating backdrop for a murder investigation, isn't it? You've got potential witnesses everywhere, but are they reliable? Were they even paying attention? Plus, the general atmosphere of revelry, the noise, the crowds, it all makes gathering solid information a real challenge.
And that's the scene where this story begins. William Smith is with some friends, hanging out in the courtyard of the Glenwood houses in Brooklyn. It's about 3 a.m., the party's winding down.
And those housing developments, they often have their own sort of internal social dynamics. Understanding those dynamics, the relationships, the tensions, it's all crucial to figuring out what really happened.
Well, the situation takes a turn when this guy, someone from a party William and his friends had tried to get into earlier, he comes storming down, clearly upset. He's yelling, wanting to know who messed with his party. And William, he kind of throws back a remark.
And this is one of those moments that just makes you shake your head. A situation that could have been de-escalated, but instead.
Yeah. William, maybe trying to act tough, he says, if you're going to bust me now.
It's heartbreaking. We don't know exactly what William was thinking, but we often see these kinds of statements when someone's trying to appear fearless, or maybe even challenge someone who's armed. It's a dangerous game.
And in this case, it turned deadly. The guy shoots William right in the face.
It's a tragic reminder that words can have consequences, even when you don't intend them to.
William's friends, understandably terrified, they scatter. One of them, once she reaches safety, immediately calls 911. Police arrive, and the investigation gets underway.
In those early stages of a homicide investigation, eyewitness testimony, it's crucial. And in this case, they had 3 witnesses. And what's interesting is they all gave very similar descriptions of the shooter.
They describe him as a light-skinned black male. They mention light eyes and freckles. One even remembers him wearing a hat. Seems pretty solid, right?
Absolutely. The consistent details, they lend a lot of weight to the witness accounts, especially since they were interviewed separately, which helps to reduce the risk of them influencing each other's memories.
That consistency led the police pretty quickly to a suspect, a guy named Lloyd. Problem is, Lloyd, well, he vanished, disappeared. Imagine that in a time before social media, before everyone left a digital trail everywhere they went.
It was a different world back then. So much easier to assume a new identity and just disappear. A real challenge for law enforcement.
They searched everywhere. His known hangouts, they contacted family and friends. Nothing. They even put him on America's Most Wanted.
Hoping to leverage the power of the media. Sometimes it worked, but not this time.
For 16 years, the case went cold.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? William's family, his friends, knowing that his killer was out there somewhere, living a new life.
It's a testament to their resilience and to the investigators who, well, they refuse to let the case completely fade away, and it makes what happens next even more amazing.
Because what happens next, it all goes down in, of all places, Montgomery, Alabama, in 2007.
And here's the kicker. It wasn't some fancy forensic technology or a seasoned detective that cracks the case. It's a DMV worker.
The DMV worker, you can't be serious.
Totally serious. This DMV worker, she's brand new, just finished training on how to spot fake IDs, and wouldn't you know it, a man walks in, calls himself Rashad Hamid, trying to get a driver's license.
And something's not quite right with his documents, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, red flags everywhere, a laminated social security card, fonts that are all messed up, raised lettering, the whole 9 yards. This DMV worker, fresh out of training, she catches it all, immediately alerts a state trooper who's stationed at the DMV.
So this totally ordinary event, a DMV worker doing her job, it ends up exposing this huge crack in Lloyd's new life. It's wild.
It really is. Reminds you that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places.
What happens next? Does Rashad freak out?
Oh, absolutely. He's asked to step into an office for questioning, and as soon as they tell him he's being arrested for having fake documents, he bolts, tries to run.
16 years on the run, and then he panics over a fake ID. What was he thinking?
It's probably a mix of panic and knowing that even a minor charge could unravel everything. Whatever the reason, he tries to make a run for it. There's a struggle, but the officers eventually catch him.
I bet fingerprints played a role here.
Of course. Standard procedure. They fingerprint him, run the prints, and boom. Rashad Hamid is actually Derek Lloyd, the fugitive they'd been looking for all these years.
16 years. And a DMV worker brings him down. Amazing.
It really is. Proof that those investigators who never gave up, they were right to keep pushing.
So Derek Lloyd is extradited back to New York. He's finally going to face trial for William's murder. But after all this time, it's not going to be a simple case, right?
Definitely not. This happened back in 91, and now it's 2007. They have to rebuild the entire case, re-interview witnesses, and hope that memories haven't faded too much after all this time.
The witnesses are key, right? Their testimony is what the whole case rests on. But can they still identify Derek Lloyd after all these years?
That's the big question, isn't it? Their ability to positively identify him is going to be crucial, and eyewitness testimony, we know it can be powerful, but it can also be unreliable, especially after so much time.
So after all this time, can these women still look at Derek Lloyd and say, with certainty, that he's the one who killed their friend?
They can. Each one, separately, picks Derek Lloyd out of a lineup. Seems like the prosecution is building a strong case.
But Derek Lloyd and his defense team, they have their own strategy. They're going with alibi witnesses.
It's a classic defense tactic.
So they're saying Derek wasn't even at the party that night.
Exactly. They bring in witnesses who say Derek was with his girlfriend instead, his sister, who hosted the party, and a friend who was there. They both say they didn't see Derek anywhere near the scene.
It becomes a case of he said, she said, then. And with almost 20 years past, well, that just adds another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. Now the jury has to decide. Who do they believe? The eyewitnesses or the alibi witnesses? And back in 91, they didn't have all the digital evidence we rely on today. No cell phone records, no surveillance footage.
It all comes down to who the jury believes. What happens next?
The first trial ends in a hung jury. They can't reach a unanimous verdict.
A mistrial. So it's back to square one.
Basically, everyone has to go through the whole process again. It must have been incredibly frustrating for William's family.
They come so close, only to have it all fall apart because the jury can't agree. Devastating. So they retry the case.
They do in 2011. And the second trial, well, it follows a similar pattern. The prosecution presents its case, focusing on the eyewitness testimony. The defense sticks with their alibi strategy. But this time, something changes. This time, the jury comes back with a guilty verdict.
Wow.
Derek Lloyd is found guilty of William Smith's murder.
After all these years.
Years of waiting, William's family finally gets a conviction.
I bet there was a huge sense of relief.
Absolutely.
But this is a complicated case.
Oh, it's not over yet.
I figured as much.
Derek Lloyd's lawyers, they file an appeal.
Oh, so they're not giving up.
It's pretty standard in cases like this, with such serious consequences.
So what grounds did they have for the appeal? What were they hoping to achieve?
They claimed that there were some procedural errors during the trial.
Procedural errors, like what?
They specifically focused on a piece of evidence. It was kind of indirectly referenced during the trial, but it was never formally admitted as evidence.
You mean like a technicality?
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's enough to get a conviction overturned?
Sometimes, yeah.
Seriously?
The appeals court agreed with the defense.
Really?
They said that this error, even if it wasn't intentional, it could have influenced the jury's decision.
Wow.
So they overturned the conviction.
So Derek Lloyd gets another trial.
That's right, a third trial.
A third trial. This case is like a roller coaster.
It really is.
What happens next?
Well, by this time, the original prosecutor had passed away.
Oh, wow.
So a new prosecutor, Emily Dean, she takes over the case.
A new prosecutor, a third trial. This case just keeps going and going. It's like something you'd see on TV.
And Emily Dean, she faced a lot of pressure taking on this case with all its history and the emotional weight surrounding it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So what happened with this third trial? Was there anything different about it?
This third trial, well, it took a dramatic turn.
Really? How so?
In the first two trials, Derek Lloyd, he never testified.
He never took the stand.
Never.
I wonder why.
But in this third trial, he decides to testify.
Oh, wow. What made him change his mind?
Well, he wanted to try to explain why he disappeared after the murder.
Yeah.
He told the jury that he was on parole at the time.
Oh, so he was already in trouble with the law.
Exactly. And he said that he was afraid of being sent back to prison, so he ran.
That's a risky move, isn't it? I mean, testifying in your own defense, you open yourself up to cross-examination.
Oh, for sure, it's a gamble.
And the prosecution can really grill you.
Absolutely.
So what happened?
Well, Emily Dean, she was a skilled prosecutor.
Yeah.
And Derek Lloyd, by trying to explain himself, he actually gave the prosecution an opening to introduce new evidence.
Evidence that they couldn't use before.
Exactly.
What kind of evidence?
Remember Derek Lloyd's sister's friend, the one who was at the party?
The one who said she saw Derek there.
Yeah, and remember she was threatened by the sister to keep quiet.
That's right. She was pressured to stay silent.
So, because Derek Lloyd brought up his parole status, the judge ruled that the prosecution could call this friend as a witness.
Wow.
And she testified about the threats from Derek's sister.
Oh, man.
Which, of course, made it seem like there was a cover-up going on.
To protect Derek.
Exactly.
So his attempt to explain himself kind of backfired.
Big time.
What did the jury do?
Well, they heard all the evidence, including Derek Lloyd's testimony and the testimony from his sister's friend.
Right.
And they deliberated and came back with another guilty verdict.
Wow.
Derek Lloyd was convicted again for William Smith's murder.
Third time's the charm.
You could say that.
Justice delayed but not denied.
Exactly.
So what was his sentence this time?
He got 18 years to life in prison.
18 years to life.
And this time the appeals court upheld the conviction.
No more appeals, no more trials.
It was finally over.
After all those years, William's family could finally have some closure.
It's a powerful example of how law enforcement and prosecutors, they can work tirelessly to get justice.
Yeah, they never gave up on this case.
In this case, it really shows how complicated things can get with eyewitness testimony, especially with so much time passing.
It's amazing that those witnesses could still remember details from 25 years ago.
They had to face Derek Lloyd in court 3 different times.
Wow.
And still point to him as the man who killed their friend.
That night must have been seared into their memories.
Absolutely. But it also makes you think, how reliable can eyewitness testimony be after so long?
Yeah. I mean, could their memories have been influenced over time?
That's a really important question, and this case brings up a lot of those questions about memory and how it works and how it's used in legal cases.
And, beyond all the legal stuff, there's the human side of this story.
Of course.
William Smith, he was so young when he was murdered.
Yeah, life cut short.
And his family and friends, their lives were changed forever.
Absolutely.
What happened to his family during all this time while they were waiting for justice?
That's something we can't forget about.
Yeah.
For William's family, the pain of losing him was made even worse by all the uncertainty and the legal battles.
I can't imagine waiting all those years not knowing if the person who killed your loved one would ever be held accountable.
It must have been incredibly difficult for them to keep reliving that night over and over again with every trial and every appeal.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine.
But they never gave up hope.
They never gave up on justice.
Their strength and resilience are really remarkable.
Their inspiration.
Absolutely. It's a story of incredible loss, but also of faith in the justice system and a determination to see justice served.
This case, it really shows how much violent crime can impact a community.
Yeah, it's not just about the legal proceeding. It's about the people affected, the families, the community. The ripple effects can last for years.
Definitely. And this case in particular brings up some tough questions.
Like what?
Like, could Derek Lloyd have been caught sooner?
That's a good question.
Should his past convictions have been a bigger red flag for law enforcement? Could they have maybe connected the dots earlier?
It's always easy to look back in hindsight and see what maybe could have been done differently.
Yeah.
But investigations, they don't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
You're dealing with limited information, you're dealing with limited resources, and you're trying to make the best decisions you can with what you have at the time.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it still makes you wonder if there are ways to improve things.
Sure.
To prevent these kinds of cases from dragging on for decades.
Like maybe stricter document verification practices.
Exactly like what happened with Derek Lloyd at the DMV.
Right.
Maybe that could help stop criminals from disappearing.
It's certainly possible, and this case could be a good example for law enforcement, a case study to see if there are ways to do things better.
To improve their methods.
Exactly.
What really strikes me is how this case, it all came down to a bunch of seemingly random events.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the DMV worker who was paying attention. You have this chance encounter.
At the DMV.
And then this procedural error during the trial.
And then Derek Lloyd's decision to testify.
It's like a chain reaction.
You never know what little detail is going to end up being the key to the whole thing.
It really makes you think about how justice works.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's not always a straight line.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And it also shows how important the human element is in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the decisions that people make, even small ones, can have huge consequences.
That's so true.
I think this case, it shows us that justice might not always be easy,
Yeah.
but it's always worth fighting for.
And it's important to remember the people who are fighting for it, you know?
Yeah.
The investigators, the prosecutors, the families of victims, they never give up.
They're the ones who make sure that justice happens.
And in this case, William Smith's family, they never lost hope.
Even after all those years,
They're an inspiration.
they really are.
Their strength and determination to see justice done, it's amazing.
This deep dive, it's been a journey. A look at a complicated case.
With so many twists and turns.
A case that makes you think about memory and justice and how violence affects people.
For years and years.
What do you think about this case, listener? What sticks with you? What questions do you have?
This case, it brings up some big questions.
Yeah.
About how memory works, about how our justice system works, about the long-term impact of crime on people and communities.
It's definitely something to think about.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 1991 New Year's Eve murder of William Smith.
It's been a fascinating case.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world around you.